We'll just go ahead and get started now. I'm Richard Olga, I'm with the Foley Institute, and on behalf of the Institute, I'd like to welcome you all out here today for our final event of the year, which is with our legislative delegation. And I want to take a moment here to just thank you both for taking time out of your schedules. This has been a regular occurrence in person for many years, and Senator Schoesler's picture is now up on the wall. Mary, one day we'll have yours up there as well. And it's always been really appreciated that they take the time to come and speak to students, so I do thank you for that. What I'll do here is I'll introduce you both, and maybe you could just take a few minutes to talk to everyone, and then we can take some questions from the audience. So by way of introductions, Senator Mark Schoesler has represented Washington's 9th legislative district since 1993. Firstly for 12 years as a representative and as senator since 2005. He held leadership roles in the Senate since 2006 as the Senate Republican leader for 8 years, which includes time as the Senate Majority Leader. He currently serves on 2 Senate committees, Labour, Commerce and Tribal Affairs, and also on Ways and Means, as well as he also has an appointed position on the Select Committee on Pension Policy. Senator Schoesler is a 5th-generation farmer and lives on land that his family has farmed in Ritzville since the 1880s. Representative Mary Dye was appointed to the state legislature in May 2015 and subsequently elected in a special election in November of that year. She serves on the Appropriations and Capital Budget Committees and is the ranking minority member on the Environment and Energy Committee. She's a long-term resident of Pomeroy and operates a 3,000-acre wheat farm with her husband. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to be back at one of the annual events we truly enjoy in the 9th District. Everything in the bio is correct. Kudos. Sometimes we make a mistake, but this was 100% on. Gearing up for the session, I expect the announcement will come that I'll be the ranking Republican on the Capital Budget Committee, which I really enjoyed because with the 60% vote on bonds, it's always a pretty bipartisan effort. Only when the majorities get lopsided does it become totally partisan. And Senator Mullet from the 5th Legislative District is someone I found I really enjoy working with. He's going to be the new chair. His predecessor, Senator Frock, and I were diametrically opposites who could have a scotch together and get along fine. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll probably continue on labor and commerce. The core issue of labor and commerce is just that, labor issues. And pretty rough and tumble. But then you get into gambling, liquor, and cannabis, which create unique problems and unique challenges or opportunities for that matter. So we'll be looking at that. I expect I'll probably find a bill to introduce there. And I'm probably looking at adding a 3rd committee again if it's something that interests me, and at this point in my career I want to have something I'm truly interested in, not just taking up space. I think we can get into a summary of the budget pretty simple in that revenue is still growing, albeit not as fast. Capital budget, the bond limit is slowing down because of factors that are a little more complicated than a brief intro can offer, but that's sort of the playing field of where we're at today, so I'll turn it over to the representative.
Well, thank you for hosting us again. This is an annual event that I really look forward to and missed greatly during the COVID, and so this is really exciting to be back in person. I am choosing to stay on appropriations because of my ranking position on environment and energy. And the big question that will be laid before us is that we had passed a cap and trade program, that the first auction for the cap and trade will occur in January, and revenues will start coming in from the energy economy into the state government. And that chunk of money that is available is not part of the general fund as yet. It's not being accounted for, and I have placed before the legislature some policy to direct those funds towards some resiliency and adaptation policies that we can use those so that people that are going to end up paying higher energy costs generally will get some immediate benefit from, and we can actually do some significant environmental work that has been delayed for decades due to the fact that there's never been a dedicated revenue source. So that's one of my major projects. And then, of course, capital budget, we refer to it in the House as the Fund Committee. And it truly is because it's one of the few committees where we work very bipartisan and we work collaboratively. And there isn't a partisan or ideological animosity. It's just like build good things and make sure that everybody's district is able to benefit according to their needs as well. So I look forward to this session. We'll have a new chair in the energy and environment. The new chair will most likely be Beth Dolio, as far as but I'm sure those announcements will be made. Beth is returning from an attempt at a run for Congress and now is returning back to the House. And a person that I look forward to working with. So anyway, it's going to be a different, my sense after Assembly Days is that people want to be working together. The 2 years of being siloed in our own Zoom meetings wasn't healthy for public policy. And I think people really want to repair some of the damage that might have been caused from being apart.
Well, that's great. Thank you. We've got plenty of time for questions, but I think I'll jump straight in and use my bully pulpit here and just see if I could ask a question first. And it's spurred because, Senator, I saw that you received an award from Habitat for Humanity back in April. And I just wondered, this is one issue that really affects both sides of the Cascade Curtain, which is that of affordable housing. I'm just wondering what you've got planned, and Representative, if you've also got some thoughts, what you're thinking about doing for tackling that.
I think that I'd like to see it be a permanent part of the Housing Trust Fund allocation, because we get so much more bang for our buck. And I'll give you two examples I saw. Last year, they were building tiny homes for homeless veterans in Mason County for $130,000 for a tiny home. At the same time, Habitat for Humanity could build a single family home for under $100,000. I visited a development in Pasco that's Habitat for Humanity, $190,000 in this economy, a nice single family home, garage, good lot, neighborhood where people want to live. You compare that to a cumbersome government process, and I think it's better value. And the pride of ownership, if you have sweat equity in your house versus just giving it to somebody, that's the way this country should be. You have skin in the game and you solve a problem within the private sector. So I like it. I expect we'll probably continue making Habitat or comparable groups eligible because of the incredible value to the taxpayers. Yes?
Is the reason that you think that it should be not the government's job to do that and pass off to a private sector because you receive almost, I think it might be your most campaign contributions are from real estate. I think that's the sector your top.
Pick any sector. I've got a lot of broad contributions. I don't care. Habitat for Humanity has no PAC. They do it because these are people of faith and community dedicated people that want to do something. Housing isn't a core function of government in our Constitution, but it's become a big part. If I can deliver a better value to the taxpayers, I should and will. Yeah.
I have worked with DGSS on campus, the Division of Governmental Studies and Services, and I have looked into two particular movements. One is the Housing First movement, and the second is a push to, like, a punitive push on homelessness and vehicle residency. Regarding those two topics, have you seen anything in either the Housing First push that might be promising, or any faults you find in that that initiative, or the difficulties that people find even in vehicle residency?
Well, you know, you're talking pretty broad when you talk punitive. Punitive isn't punitive, sometimes it's just enforcing our laws. And we do have laws in this country and the state that we need to enforce. Housing is not a right in our Constitution, nor is it referenced in our Constitution. But we do provide it because we're compassionate. We have a lot of money right now. So they're there and they're useful, but I wouldn't call enforcing our laws ever punitive.
What about the Housing First?
Housing's first, as a movement or an organization?
It's a particular initiative. There are certain pilot programs in the Seattle area, especially.
No, I don't. I think if we look at housing, government housing is slow, cumbersome, and overpriced. I mean, there are so many people with their beak in the trough getting something, and it's expensive. I mean, $130,000 for a cottage for a homeless vet is not a good value. So we have to look at how we deliver services in the most effective, compassionate way we can. But housing is not a constitutional right. Yes.
Is a landlord not a beak in the trough? And this thing about the constitutional right, I mean, God, like you said, shouldn't we just do it? I mean, promote general welfare. Is that not the goal of the federal government? There are thousands of homeless on the street. Is that not a failure of the market?
First of all, we're talking about the state, not the federal constitution or government, okay? Let's go there first. Then, let's look at what we're doing, and I'll tell you what, I know more people fleeing the rental housing business than you can shake a stick at. You know why? Because people quit paying their rent with no repercussions, even though their incomes didn't drop. The scale is tilted against landlords. I'll tell you, I know.
Because they own things?
Sir, please let me give your answer. Let me answer my question.
You're right.
Okay. I know individual landlords can't wait to get rid of their properties because it's staggered against them. I've seen it in my own family. They can't wait to get rid of them. And what you're going to get, you're not going to get the entrepreneur providing housing. You're going to get very large corporations that provide large amounts of housing. They have their own lawyers, their own property managers, not the benevolent mom and pop investors that built a lot of housing in this region.
Those corporations you're talking about are the exact ones that are funding your
Would you
campaign
please
now.
raise your hand?
Yes, I extend my question to her.
And if you want to talk about campaigns, it's my public record. And I can tell you, Habitat for Humanity never gave me a PAC contribution. They gave me a golden hammer.
Okay.
So I'd like to take a different tactic to kind of show you some of the complications. We have a huge housing shortage in our state, and a real focus on affordable housing, which is state subsidized to bring some of those costs down. But while the right hand is funding those through our capital budget, the left hand is saying that we have to improve our environmental standards. So the Building Code Council mandated that we have a fuel switch from an affordable natural gas-based heating system to a heat pump system, adding another $30,000 per unit onto the cost of constructing new housing. So, you know, we're trying to do two things that conflict with each other, and it's driving that cost up. And then the third thing I would say that's really caused shortages in our housing is the fact that we have growth management, which consolidates our development within urban growth boundaries and creating shortages of buildable space. And so as populations have grown over 2.5 million people since we enacted growth management, we really run the cost of housing, in particular in the greater Puget Sound area, to a point that's unaffordable for the first-time homeowner, or for even people who want to work in the Seattle area and have to rent their housing. And so oftentimes those rents are higher than what a mortgage would be out in our part of the state. And so I just would suggest that we need to think more holistically. And when we talk about housing first, you know, compassion is important, but we have to be able to identify the issue, and the language we use is pretty important. And there's a pretty big intersectionality between substance use disorder and homelessness, and we're never really able to pin down what we can do to help people avoid those traps in the first place by building and encouraging society where people know that they have agency to make their lives better and good, right? And then we also are not dealing with people who already have fallen into the trap of addiction, and what is the best way, and those debates will continue, obviously. And so we've purchased a lot of units of hotel space to try and get people in shelter, because it's certainly not humane to have people living under blue tarps in forests outside of Olympia, right? That's not where we want to go. We don't want people living under the I-5 and just drowning in their addiction. We want people to receive, you know, opportunities to redo in life, right? To really grow our approach. So the question is, how do we do that? And we're finding that our compassion overcomes our common sense, and a lot of those units are just promoting a continuing spiral into further addiction. And I hope that this session there will be a lot of talk about mental health and crisis services, and I hope that we can talk collaboratively about new innovations on how to approach it. I don't think as a legislature with the divide caused by not being in session together, that we could have those conversations, and we're a little behind. And obviously there's been a lot more mental health crises among people during the COVID and coming out of COVID. And so I think that that'll be a large, a major issue that we'll have to contend with. And I hope that the in the hallway conversations, the you know, being able to just talk to each other on the floor of the House while we're debating and in the committees, I hope that we have more innovative thinking between all of us.
Gentleman in the very back.
Hi. This is, I guess, kind of completely not germane to what the housing conversation we're having. But unlike most state legislatures, Washington uses Reed's rules as its parliamentary authority to guide business. Most state legislatures use Mason's manual. I just find this kind of topic really fascinating, and I was just wondering, does Reed's more broad language and more emphasis on special rules and the powers of leadership promote more legislative productivity, or does Mason's manual's more expansive language protect the rights of legislators and allow their communities to be heard?
You know, I was raised under Robert's Rules of Orders by the FFA, and if you look at FBLA and other student leadership organizations, that's what they use. You got to really get into the weeds to see the different interpretations between Reed's Rules of Order, Roberts, and the other, which I'm not even familiar with. But it's really in the weeds differences, and I don't know how or why. It was that way when I arrived, and I guess will continue to be.
And I came up from the party, so we used Robert's rules, and of course, what you wouldn't know behind the closed doors is that we have brutal battles with Robert's rules, and you know, so it's always been, you know, the tactics, the strategies, you know, there's always disagreements even within your own partisan views, right? And I'm sure if we could look behind the closed doors of the Democrat Party, it would be the same way. But so then getting into the House and being under Reed's rules, it was interesting to note that we don't weaponize the parliamentary procedure nearly as much as we did actually coming up through the rough and tumble of the party. So I guess I would say that the adaptation to Reed's hasn't been as painful as I expected.
You were next, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question, I guess, for both. Doesn't matter in order. I know you kind of briefly talked about it in your intro, but like, like what are you most looking forward to, or like your main goal for the next legislative session that you like would want to focus on?
Mhm. Well, I think my primary focus will be the capital budget. That's my assignment. We've got an interesting challenge because the debt limit grew very incrementally. And we've got a couple of projects that are consuming a lot of resources. So getting those pieces into place and doing it bipartisan, because like I said in my intro, capital budget is generally a bipartisan effort, give and take. And then one of the things related to that, I've got several bills that I'm going to introduce to lower the cost of K-12 school construction. Everybody just wants more, but what are we doing to contain the cost? Probably going to look at one liquor bill that I think makes sense and see what else comes along. I'll probably reintroduce some things that I've worked on. The school appreciation account for repairs, something I've got to the floor of the House. Want to finish that yet. Irrigation district elections, which are kind of foreign here, but if you get to Adams and Franklin County, they're a big deal. So those are a few of the things I've got in the queue.
And so I'm looking forward to my second term as ranking on environment and energy. And we have opportunities to work with the funding pools that were created through cap and trade. And so I have a bill that directs that funding towards the forest health project that Hillary Franz put to give them a permanent stream of funding so that we can really reinvigorate our forests as a landscape scale resiliency tool during the climate change. And I don't think that the climate activists are looking at the full equation. They're looking at emissions reductions and fuel switching, and they're not really looking at the opportunity to use landscape scale resiliency to do that. We're looking at also wastewater treatment in the Puget Sound. There's over half the population that discharges wastewater into the Puget Sound, and it's oftentimes fails during power outages, and so there's a lot of sewage outflow into the sound that has created significant consequences to the health of that water body. And it's one of the two largest marine estuaries. Chesapeake Bay, which is impaired as well, is being one. And so really working to invest significant funding to remove nutrients from the wastewater, and then also working on urban heat island again. I passed a bill on urban heat island, and it's the largest body of law in the United States on that topic of urban heat island. And the second bill will be taking a program that was from Oregon that uses a trading scheme to let NGOs and community organizations invest in water quality projects before the stormwater runs into the wastewater treatment. And so the wastewater treatment would pay for those projects upstream, and that would be their trading scheme. But I'm looking forward to the session generally. I'm running a couple of bills that I ran before. I passed a bill on a wild horse training program at the prisons. The idea sparked from having attended the Foley Institute when we had the
with Noel Vest.
So I traveled to Forsyth in Arizona and spent a few days in the big behind the walls in Forsyth, working with their inmates, training their wild mustangs, and have that passed unanimously, but unfortunately was not funded due to COVID. And so I'm just going to run that bill again, and I'm doing some wildfire work as well.
Hi, I really appreciate you guys for coming, and something that was said previously was like taking a more holistic approach, especially to like the housing problem. And as someone who grew up in Western Washington, you know, the opioid epidemic really is leading to a lot of homelessness, especially in Washington State. Mm-hmm. And I think it was 2022, Seattle like opened the first like nation like safe injection site to combat the opioid epidemic. That was like $1.4 million. I know it's super controversial, but where do you guys see we should like take steps forward in helping end the opioid epidemic, because it's one of personally I think a huge reason why there's a lot of homeless people, and to end this like homeless crisis we need to like look at the mental health crisis and the drug epidemic, and safe injection sites is just one aspect, but it's a costly aspect that I don't know if Spokane and Seattle and every big city in Washington can I guess afford. So what do you guys think?
Well, I think you're right in general. I don't agree with safe injection. I had colleagues visit sites and they found it really alarming. What I do believe we absolutely have to do is revisit the Blake decision. Because under prior law, you arrested somebody for hard drugs. And while they were detoxing in jail, you considered the option of drug treatment courts or other alternatives. Now you don't even arrest them. So I think we've got a pretty broad coalition of people that believe Blake was wrong. Full legalization is not the answer, because these people with fentanyl, opioids, it's out of control. And when you get to crime, you get to homelessness, you track it. So I think there's a multifaceted approach, one of which has to be Blake, one of which has to be treatment. It's a broad problem, and I'll go back to Blake. I think it was the dumbest ruling I've ever heard of. I borrowed my roommate's jeans, and there happened to be drugs in the back pocket.
Unknowing possession.
Yeah, but maybe you tell your parents that, but I don't think most people would believe it. So I think it's multifaceted. I agree with everything except injection sites.
Right.
For myself or the representative?
Mine?
No, you had your hand up.
I have one for either, I guess.
Oh, okay. And then the gentleman behind you there,
Me?
Yeah, you hadn't asked a
Awesome.
question
Yeah,
yet.
I'd love to. So from my understanding, both the federal representatives, House Representatives Morris Rogers and the other candidate, Natasha Hill, ran campaigns kind of focusing on lowering pharmaceutical costs while also tightening up on street drugs such as fentanyl and whatnot. And then at the moment we have our Attorney General Bob Ferguson attempting to sue one of the big pharma companies at the moment. Can't remember the name. But regardless, I was just wondering, someone over here had talked about some of the drug crises going on. So I was just wondering how like the three kind of bodies work together, the Attorney General, the federal House of Representatives, as well as like the state representatives, how they kind of work, if they work together, and what that process looks like on the front of the drug crisis is that I feel like Washington is kind of taking a strong stance on, and I'm very proud of that. But
You can find a situation where we work together, and you can find situations we fight like cats and dogs.
yeah, for sure.
And I think the fact that the congressional race both had something they agreed on is a pretty good sign, because real action in pharmaceutical drug prices is not 50 different states doing different things. It is more of a national approach.
Fundamentally, it's also international, in that a lot of the pharmaceuticals that are developed in United States companies then price point differently on the export market than they do, so that the citizens of the United States are bearing the full cost of the research and development, and then the global marketplace gets a price point advantage. And I think that issue needs to be taken up at Congress, and so I hope that they can do that. And I'm glad that they found commonality on that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I just thought it was super interesting. You have like kind of the federal, typical federal, political body with kind of a political body that is like, something that we normally would think of. But it's just less of like, your representatives or senators with Bob Ferguson, joining in, and it seems like you guys have a little bit of say on that as well. So
And it also strikes me, there's a controversial piece to the puzzle, and that's the way that the PBMs, or the pharmacy benefit managers, so Obamacare inserted a pharmacy benefit manager structure that is to control the costs that they get a play in the market. They get a payment from that process. They get a kickback from the savings, and so that piece of it has been inadvertently, like unintended consequences of a bad policy, has been a real inflationary price driver. Prior to having the PBM structure, we did not have that piece inflating the retail end of the pharmaceutical, and so that piece, I think, has been put forward at that level of the House more than once. It's very controversial. There's been different ways to get at it, and I don't think we have been successful yet so far getting a successful PBM bill. We might have gotten Joe's last time.
We've had a variety of PBM bills over the years, but the unintended consequences, the pharmacy benefit manager is a really good deal for controlling costs. You can't argue it. But when you tell an independent pharmacist to sell a product that they buy below cost, that gets away from savings and it gets punitive. I mean, they'll hit the big boys like Walmart with the national chain of pharmacies, but the independent drugstore, when you're told sell X, Y, and Z below cost, and to get the benefit, you have to buy a quantity that's unrealistic, or some drugs have a limited shelf life, and you probably don't want to store that drug more than a certain amount of time. And it's been really tough on small and some of the large chain drugstores too.
Yeah, so it's a negative on both sides, and
For sure.
an economic problem.
Awesome. Thanks.
So I'm going to ask what I hope is a non-controversial question here. But it is about transportation. So I realise that could be quite tricky. I was driving and almost slid off the road coming back from Walla Walla just the other day. And I was thinking about road safety, and I appreciate it very much. I drive a lot in the district. The 195 passing lanes that have been added on, I think they really make it a lot safer. Someone asked a sort of three-part question here, hopefully all short and non-controversial answers. So the first one is, I wonder if you have any numbers about whether that's improved safety on that road, if there's been fewer accidents. I haven't heard of any deaths this winter or last winter that I can recall, but I don't always hear all of that. So first, if that's improved safety. And then second, we're surely going to have probably a lot of people in this room are going to be driving on the 26th back over to the west side. And I just wonder if there's any plans for increasing passing lanes there, and also on the 195 between here and Colfax, because especially during the sort of end and start of semesters, we get a lot of traffic, and sometimes some inexperienced drivers who don't realise that there are not such good times to pass, to put it mildly. And then my final question is, and this may be more controversial, is there was an effort a few years ago to rename the 26 highway to the Cougar Highway, and I'm just wondering if you ever thought about that'd be a cool thing to do.
Well, long question, how about a long answer?
Great.
Okay. First of all, I haven't seen any statistics yet on 195, but I know that was a very popular part of connecting Washington, and it got done. We have part of the lanes done on 26. One was delayed due to wet soil conditions last year. We're also down because DOT used COVID as an excuse not to work. I mean, we can't work on right-of-way acquisition. BS. DOT is going to request clarity. There's supposed to be yet one more passing lane on 26 or climbing in the queue, so they're going to make that request. Naming roads is hazardous, and I'll tell you why. The late Senator Eugene Prince was transportation guy. Loved it. Well, they named the bridge at Central Ferry the Elmer Huntley Bridge. He just about got his head handed to him. You got to be really careful when you name a road, because it sounds really good to us, Coug Nation. Others may have other ideas when you get a little farther west. So, I always say Gene Prince taught me a lot, and be a little cautious before you do naming.
Is that why the bridge is in such poor shape at Central Ferry?
No, that transportation when I was majority leader, 2/3 of the Senate voted for the entire transportation package, and a greater number for the bonds. This was the first transportation package in anybody's memory. It was totally partisan. You've gone a different direction. And if you don't like highways, you can have the rebar sticking out of the Huntley Central Ferry Bridge and nobody cares. So the growing partisan nature of this last transportation package, because there was no bonding, it was 100% partisan, that is a bad trend in public policy. Because you go back, nobody that tracks Olympia ever remembers a party line transportation package. There was always some Dems that would go with the R's that would go with the D's. They asked the late Irv Newhouse, how do you pass a transportation package? And he says, well, you go find who's not up for election in the Senate next time and get them to vote for it. And it worked, whatever reasons, but it has deteriorated into something so partisan, I fear for it, creating another package. We can disagree on how the money should be spent, but to reach that level of excluding major parts of the state, in Connecting Washington, there was nobody in the 4th Legislative District would vote for the package because there were taxes in it. And I don't like taxes either, but I voted for it. But the project in the Spokane Valley was so critical to the economy that Senator King put it in there anyway. That's how transportation used to be. That, we know they won't vote for it there, but it is so darn critical to our economy, we'll do it anyway.
So on the Move Ahead Washington, there were some different things that occurred that has never been available. And one of them is that they moved $5.5 billion from the cap and trade program into that before the first auction. So that has already been approved for transportation. And that focus then is on emissions reduction, and pretty much none of that 17 billion crosses the Cascade Mountain. The other thing that I think concerned me was sweeping the Public Works Trust Fund, and that has been done regularly for other things, but that fund is for infrastructure, wastewater and sewers and drinking water across the state, and has never been defaulted on, and it's really been one of those community funds that has kept our small towns and cities infrastructure up to date, and to sweep that fund regularly is a bad policy. But back to the Elmer Huntley Bridge. This I took a lot of pictures of it in the summer when the rebar was, you could see daylight under the rebar, so that you could see that it was full lane, and it would chatter when you drove across, and then it was breaking more of the cement out. I've been bothering the Trepanier from the South District consistently. He's had to patch it, pull crews off of other projects, but the temperament of the taxpayers, they want new shiny stuff. So they've done the safety lanes there out of Walla Walla to Tri-Cities, and that's a $400 million kind of build there, federal project and state project, and that he says they would rather do that than do maintenance and operations. And unfortunately, the way we fund transportation, we didn't create a path to a maintenance and operation in a lot of the work that we did, and so there wasn't funding for that bridge. So I went to the archives, and there was an oral history that was put in the archive from Elmer Huntley, and I had it transcribed into a document so that we have that history, because Pomeroy was pretty offended that it wasn't Eugene Prince, right? And so come to find out, Elmer Huntley was 9th District representative from Palouse, and he served a career as a state representative, and then he went to the UTC, and then back as director of the department, head of the Department of Transportation. And he was in that position and shepherded the construction of the I-5. Not knowing this, then you go, well, who is that person? But you realize that his bridge, his namesake bridge, has not received any consideration for making sure that the decking is kept in good order and that bridge is maintained in honor of the person who created the transportation corridor that really shepherded in all of the economic development that has occurred in that west side Puget Sound corridor. And I think that sometimes knowing our history is helpful. So I took that history and kind of said, hey, this is the guy that helped the west side, why don't you honor his bridge? And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. However, federal government came in and that new deck is in design and engineering and will be installed next summer. So there you have it, the Elmer Huntley story.
Mark, you voted no for the expands policies regarding climate change. The establishes the state goal of stopping gas-powered vehicle production by 2030, as well as requires the state to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050, which Mary, you also voted no on. Mark, for you, is the reason that you did so is because you received $31,750 from the energy and natural resources sector, more specifically $2,000 from the American Chemical Council, $2,000 from Chevron, and $2,000 from Puget Sound Energy, among others.
No, that's not true, because I care about my constituents and our primary industries. Our constituents drive longer distances for healthcare services and shopping, higher education. We're an ag-based economy in the 9th District. We pay a disproportionate burden of this. And I don't think we even weighed the entire equation of the cost of this. If you look at the life cycle, everything that goes into an EV, no. I looked out for the number one industry and the taxpayers. We're probably going to see the largest fuel tax increase in history come from this because of the auctions for cap and trade. My late mother drove 60 miles every week for breast cancer treatment. Other parts of the state drive 6 miles. So when you look at my own mother's driving for health care, look at my friends and neighbors, no, this was about the people I represent and their economy. Because you know what? I would have gotten elected without that money. I'm pretty damn sure I would have. So it was putting my people first.
All right, I'd like to ask a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
So a lot of you say, your constituents are farmers, and a lot of wheat farming and farming in this area doesn't really use irrigation. They rely on kind of the rain cycle and weather cycle. So along with climate change, we're seeing longer periods of drought in which rain is not falling, which greatly affects harvest. A lot of climate change is created by carbon emissions. So I just want to know how you consolidate caring about your constituents who are farming and rely on the weather cycle, which is being affected by climate change, so that's their livelihood. How do you consolidate that with not voting to combat climate change?
Well, since you asked me, I'll answer that. First of all, we have a very diverse agriculture in this state, in this legislative district. We have the Columbia Basin Project in this legislative district. We have irrigated ag. We have the driest and the wettest. We have a pretty diverse agriculture. If you look at what we're doing in this state, if we did everything that Governor Inslee ever dreamed of, he'll negotiate it away in coal plants in China or other places in a heartbeat for a lot of futile efforts that really don't produce a lot of results. So at the end of the day, I'm going to put the industries and the people of this district first, not the Chinese or any other third world country that spews everything under the sun out.
So I'd like to take a stab at that as well. I direct you to the Washington State Climate Impact Center and their recent report. And this also is, if you look at some of the data globally, is that it's funny how CO2, changes things obviously. So our rainfall patterns have shifted. And so while we might not have as much snowpack for the irrigators in Idaho, we do have a real change in our rainfall pattern, and we're getting more rainfall during April to October, and we're getting longer growing seasons as a result. So unfortunately, for those that want it to all be bad news, the good news story is that due to those fundamental changes in North America and Canada growing regions, we're seeing higher yields and anticipate, according to the data, that the yields will continue to increase by 2050 by another 20 to 25 to 30 bushels an acre. So the growing regions in the northern parts, going further into the northern latitudes in Canada and Europe, will also benefit from having a little longer growing season and more timely rainfall. So it's an opportunity to say that on a landscape scale, we have an opportunity to utilize that agricultural growing base to be a large carbon sink. And due to the technology that this university has created, thanks to Dr. Jim Cook, frankly, and the Green Bridge that he got, the research that he did, that he got the Nobel Prize for, the Wolf Prize, that has converted over the last 25 years a lot of lands into direct seed, and our organic matter in the dryland regions has increased substantially. And so that, again, having organic matter contained in the soils is another tremendous carbon sink. And as we're moving forward, we're really seeing the benefits of working with the soil biome and working with the terrestrial biome to be an offset to the emissions. And as technology changes, we'll see that benefit. Same way with the ocean biome. If we clean up our pollution from wastewater treatment, we will improve the health and stability of our ocean biome as well. About 60% of the emissions since Industrial Revolution in 1850 is when I took the number. It could be argued 1870, but the total quantity, the ocean and the terrestrial biome has absorbed about 60% of that. And if we really focus on resiliency, and we could improve our ability to sequester and build a better, more robust carbon sink using the terrestrial biome to the benefit of mankind and humanity as a whole. So it's just, it's looking at the difference, a different perspective, drawing back and looking at a broader perspective on the issue. We haven't had those opportunities for that conversation because we have been so focused on petroleum industry and emissions, and not really focusing on a broader opportunity to do some really good work in the space of the environment. And there was a guy clear over on the corner that's raised his hand.
He hasn't asked a question yet?
I was going to say, we've got time for one more question.
I have since forgotten the question. Let me think. It was a couple back.
Well,
Forgive me.
the
Somebody else said something more
gentleman with
profound.
the nice beard hasn't asked one either.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I'll return it. But I'd love to have a perspective of both of you on actually the issues you've often mentioned, which is partisanship and so forth, but the national attacks, as I would see it, on mechanisms of democracy. And January 6th, obviously it's federal, but it's not in any way only federal. Your attitude toward those particular changes, generally in the Republican Party, but particularly in terms of threats to democracy.
Well, I have great confidence in our republic. We've survived that. We've survived worse over the years. I mean, when you go back and you see some of the elections and things that went on in previous centuries in this country, we've survived worse. I think we need to work to maintain individual confidence in voting. And the case in point is, I don't believe Lauren Culp won the governor's race, for example. I'm sorry, but Lauren, you didn't win. But what I think we have is vote by mail opens up more opportunities for mischief than poll voting. And I think we have to restore that confidence that we had with poll voting, that you can, we've made it super easy to vote. It's register online, download a ballot, vote by mail, postmark by election night. It's really pretty easy. But to know that nobody was playing games with that ballot. Poll voting was good, so we have to restore the public's trust that these things are actually happening right. There's way too many, if we don't prosecute a voting fraud case, we perpetuate this thing. One conviction would probably give a lot of people thought about doing it. It's a super low priority.
I think our time is up. So on that note, thank you all for coming out for our last event. Keep eyes out for our event starting up again on January the 18th. We'll have Keantha Duncan, who's the president of the NAACP in Spokane, coming to talk during Martin Luther King Week celebrations here on campus. But now I'd just like to once again thank our senator and representative for coming and speaking to us all. Thank you.